everyone. This is Bob Celeste with the Center for Supply Chain Studies, and this is our actually premiere broadcast of the Open Mic Friday. And hopefully this will be interesting for you. We thought that we wanted to actually do this for almost a couple of years now to be able to bring folks on that are doing some interesting projects, just have a conversation with them, and have people that would like to be part of the broadcast to be able to ask questions and learn a little bit. So very informal, and especially being that this is our first, I'm sure it'll be very informal. You'll probably hear a couple of voices on the line. On the line is also Lynette Burns, is our Director of Marketing.
Hello.
And she's going to be, there she is. And we'll be looking at questions. So if you have questions as we go through a little bit of a presentation and sort of a discussion with our guest today, there is an area on the webinar for you to enter questions, and we'll be kind of fielding them. We'll try to channel you as much as possible as we can, and we'll try to open up lines if we can. Sometimes that's difficult with background noise or people putting the channel on hold, but we'll see if we could get to that. We'll also be posting this on our website and as a podcast. So if you go to our website and actually go into the Open Mic Friday area, you'll see our developing schedule. So today we're going to have an interesting conversation with Ravi and Sid around tracking seafood with blockchain, but you can see in the upcoming weeks, we'll be talking about AI, machine learning, blockchain for cold chain. Our study group will be on as a panel to talk about the work that they're doing. Work in simulation. If you know anything about the center, we do our studies by using simulation software, and so we're going to have that discussion around how that could benefit and how that also works, and some other areas that throughout the next coming week. So this will be every week, every Friday at 2 p.m. Our thought was that Friday afternoons, you start to wind down a little bit, don't want to start a big project, and maybe it'd be an interesting time just to jump in on something that's casual, and you can learn something about it. So having said that, I just want to introduce our guests today. Ravi Kumar and Sid Chakravarthy. We met about, if maybe just say your names just so we understand, we can hear your voice and pin that to who's actually going to talk, if Ravi and Sid.
Hi, this is Ravi Kumar, and welcome to the webinar.
Hey everyone, this is Sid Chakravarthy. Thanks.
Great. So
thanks everyone for joining. Yeah.
Thanks for being on the show today. We met about 4 weeks ago, I think, at a cold chain conference in Philadelphia. And just as a sort of aside, in the hallway kind of meeting, talking about the different things that we were all doing. And you brought up this project of yours around tracing seafood using blockchain. And at first, it sounded like, okay, they're tracking seafood. We've heard about seafood tracking before, and they're using blockchain. That's interesting, but there's a lot of aspects that I thought was really interesting from not only from a technical perspective, but at a personal perspective, and incorporating aspects of fair trade and other things that you're doing that I thought was really interesting to see how technology touches people. And so welcome to the show. You're very brave being on the first one. So I'll give you that kudos. And maybe so what we can do is go through, I know that you've prepared a small presentation. I think that'll give us information about the depth and how you're linking together this supply chain. And then I'd like to sort of have a little back and forth about what it's meant to the parties that are working with it, the farmers, the fish farmers, all the way through the supply chain. And then we'll open it up for conversation with the audience. How's that sound?
Sounds good. Thanks, Bob.
Sounds good. Let's get started. Yep.
There you go, Ravi. I'm just sending you the controls here.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Lynette, and for the great introduction. Welcome, everyone, to this event, and thanks for joining the event again. We are excited to share our journey and story about tracking seafood from sea to fork, leveraging IoT and blockchain. As most of you are aware, cloud computing, IoT, blockchain are changing the economics and agility in multiple markets, including food and pharmaceuticals. The main concerns when we talk to our customers are around, first, food safety. Studies show that loss due to poor quality and counterfeit products will be a few $1 trillion by 2020. Next, we hear a lot of concerns around food quality. The loss of food, vaccines, waste due to cold chain failures are growing. More than 30% of the vaccines are spoiled due to ineffective cold chain failures. And food waste is actually a much bigger issue. And finally, customers are concerned about compliance to the various regulations. The Drug Supply Chain Safety Act is almost upon us by 2023. The law requires that all prescription drugs must be tracked and traced through the supply chain. So our blockchain platform, along with solutions with partners, address many of these concerns. Actually, our solution enables visibility, monitoring, and tracking of food on its journey from the manufacturer to the end customer. Blockchain and our platform actually provide trust, transparency, and authenticity in the extended supply chain. The key benefits of our solution are it reduces cost, it prevents food waste, it increases margins by improving quality, and it accelerates compliance. For an agenda we have, I'll start with a brief background about blockchain, and then the background of the company, and then we'll talk about the case study, which is very interesting, how we were able to track the sea food from sea to fork. We are located in multiple locations in US, India, and Singapore. Our journey started out with T-Hub in India, which is an accelerator or an incubator for startups. Since then, we have actually participated in multiple accelerators, including the InsurTech Startup Bootcamp in Hartford, Connecticut. We have been recognized by multiple publications as a promising startup in the blockchain market, on the blockchain space. So with that, let me get started with a brief introduction to blockchain. I know most of you on this call, probably many of you are familiar with blockchain and with Bitcoin. Blockchain is the underlying platform for Bitcoin. This slide gives you a little bit introduction into blockchain basics. Blockchain, if you look at it, it is a distributed ledger. It keeps track of all the transactions in a peer-to-peer network. Next, it is very secure. All information that's stored in the blockchain is encrypted and stored. The records are immutable. So once information is recorded in a blockchain, it's permanent. It provides non-repudiation. Next, it's a decentralized ledger. So any updates to the blockchain are done using a consensus algorithm. All stakeholders have visibility into any updates on the blockchain. Since it's a distributed ledger, it is highly available. The failure of any node will not cause the failure of the whole platform. And finally, since we are using permission blockchains for tracking the seafood, it ensures data privacy and segregation of the data. Now, next, going on to how blockchain works, we have two stakeholders who want to update, who have a transaction that they want to create, input it into the blockchain. So they basically create a block. Then the block is actually verified by all participants, and we go through the consensus algorithm, which Sid will talk about. There are multiple consensus algorithms here, and once all the stakeholders verify the block, then it is a hash is created and it's encrypted and it's stored in the blockchain itself. Now, once it's entered into blockchain, it is permanent, non-reputable, and a transparent record of the transaction. This slide gives you a little bit more details on how a block looks, some of the key attributes or of the block are basically the timestamp. Then it has the nonce, which is a random number, which could be used to create which is used for encryption. And it also has a hash or a pointer to the previous block. And and also there's the Merkle root of the transaction, and this is a way by which large amounts of data can be hashed to create to save on storage space. So you have some of that information in the block itself. You can use smart contracts, etc., to update the blocks, and we'll talk a little bit more about it in the next few slides.
So Ravi, when we're talking about actually applying this to the supply chain that you're about to talk about, how aware of all the technical detail that you just went through is the user? So you're talking about fish, we're talking about the fishermen out there on a boat. Do they have any awareness that they're connected to a blockchain and Merkle trees and all that?
No, great, excellent question. So most of this technology is hidden. I think that's the beauty of what we bring to the table. So Sid will show you a few user interfaces that the fishermen have to use, and all that they have to use is a mobile phone. They just click on the amount of fish, the type of fish that's being harvested on a particular day, and once that input is given by the fisherman on the mobile phone, that information gets to our IoT gateway and then into our blockchain services platform, and we do all the magic after that of sending the transaction over to all the stakeholders based on the consensus algorithm and inputting that data into the blockchain. So we'll definitely talk a lot more about that later in our presentation, but from the user perspective, all that you need is just a mobile phone to use the platform.
Okay, so they're not going home at night saying they're trying to impress their kids with the fact that they've been on a blockchain all day.
No, great. No, I just want to give a little bit more insights to this audience, so they will know a little bit more about what's the magic behind blockchain.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
Great. So I think from a seafood supply chain, I think the supply chain is fairly familiar there are multiple stakeholders. There's the fishermen at one end. There are local buyers, international buyers, distributors, wholesalers, and then consumers. In our case, Sid will talk about the journey, but we had fish harvested in India going all the way into overseas markets for consumption. The data that we tracked and that's interesting for our customers was basically the contracts. Now, as the food or the seafood moves on its journey from one stakeholder to another, from the fisherman to the local buyer to the national buyer, etc., there are contracts, and today many of these contracts are not permanent records, and that makes it a challenge for the international buyers. So we store the contract information in the blockchain. Next, we have temperature information that is dynamically recorded, and this is actually a permanent record, as well as it gives you a fail-proof way to basically ensure the temperature was maintained on the journey of the seafood or the product from the harvesting to the time it reaches the national buyer to the consumer. Next, we also have identification numbers to track these packages, and which have information on the type of fish. So all of that information is recorded on the blockchain. Now, this slide gives you a lot more details into the types of information that we are recording. Again, this may change a bit based on the customers, but I think what was interesting to our customers was the certificate of origin, the batch numbers, the processing date, when was the fish harvested, information on the temperature, what was the range that was maintained, when the package was received at the different locations with the local distributor or the national distributor, and then definitely a lot of information about the provenance of the fish. So I think all of that information we do record in the blockchain. And next, this slide gives you a little bit more details into our platform. Our platform is built around open source blockchain platforms like Ethereum, Hyperledger, or multi-chain. It delivers a set of services to make these platforms more scalable, available, improve the performance of the open source blockchain platforms, and also to manage the data and to manage the inputs into these platforms, at the same time also to provide alerts, etc., in case any of the parameters are not meeting expectations. Along with our customers, along with our partners, actually, some of the solutions we provide to our customers are around visibility. We provide real-time visibility by abstracting and analyzing the data from multiple sensors and other data stores using zero-knowledge analytics. We enable organizations to have near real-time intelligent insight into the extended supply chain. Next, we have solutions around monitoring. We do real-time monitoring of physical, digital, or any kind of shared assets in the supply chain. So in combination with the intelligent rules engine, we enable extended supply chains to become more predictive and to eliminate waste. And finally, we track. We do tracking. So it enables organizations it enables organizations to track the health of goods across the supply chain so we leverage IoT and blockchain to provide a transparent and trusted method to track the assets. So I think these are some of the solutions, again, we enable with our partners to meet the needs of the end customers. So with that, let me go ahead and hand it over to Sid to talk about how we have developed some of the internals in the blockchain to actually track the journey of the product, and also how we have set up some rules to ensure that if there is any kind of failure, that can be reported appropriately to the stakeholders. So with that, let me go ahead and hand it over to Sid.
Thank you, Ravi. As Ravi mentioned, we abstract the data from multiple data silos and sequence it out so that we are creating this intelligent information about the journey of the product from all the way from the source to the end consumer. And this information that can be leveraged by businesses and individuals along the supply chain so that they can get actionable insights by leveraging it. So one of the industries where we spent a lot of time running projects in the past few years, even from the very early days of blockchain, is in the fisheries. It is an enormous industry with a vast number of problems. It is also very global, fragmented, and also complex industry with an average supply chain spanning hundreds of miles and involving different stakeholders. And these stakeholders exchange information about the product and also move the product from one location to another location. With such complexities, it is very hard to ensure quality and safety of fish that is getting delivered to the consumers, which is us. So that's it's very interesting when we actually followed the supply chain. There's a lot of issues in the supply chain. For example, like how many of us can be sure that the white tuna that we are having at some of the local sushi bars is actually tuna, because in most cases, at least as per many researchers, at least 1/3 of the product which is labeled as white tuna in the restaurants is actually escolar, which is also popularly known as oil fish, and which can cause all sorts of troubles after you consume that fish. So according to it's very common. So according to many researchers, at least 1/3 of all the products that have been labeled in the fish industry are not what they say on the label. And it's also because of the manual errors, but it's also because of the illegal activity in the fishing industry. And it's a huge problem to the fishing industry as a whole, not just a problem to the end consumer, but it has a huge economic cost to the fishing industry as well. And some estimates say that the cost to the global fishing industry due to illegal fishing is nearly 25 billion annually. So it's a huge number, right? So one of the, yeah.
What kind of, you had talked a little bit about the amount of waste that might go into the current processes. Can you give us a sort of an idea around that?
Sure, yeah. So one of the biggest challenges is also, as you rightly mentioned, is the food waste. There's a lot of food at a consumer level in your home or in the restaurant, but there's an equally large amount of food waste in the supply chains as well. And one of the most common reason for food waste is problems associated with cold chain. So any temperature breach for an extended period of time causes damage, spoilage of fish during the transportation or in the storage. And this is very common not only in the developing countries like India, but also in a well-equipped countries like US. So the wastage of food in the supply chains is estimated around 20%, 20 to 25% in US, whereas in the developing countries or tropical countries, it's higher at 40 to 45%. So there's huge, enormous amount of wastage when it comes to seafood.
And in this case, how that impacts the fishermen also?
Oh yes, so it impacts fishermen. It impacts the local buyers, local distributors, because the pricing is based on by calculating the wastage. So what the distributor usually do is when they're buying the fish from the fishermen, they put a 30% of the price as going to waste. So they lower the price that they pay to the end fishermen, saying that, hey, I mean, 30% is going to waste anyway, so we only pay you like X amount.
So even though they're not responsible for that waste, they get penalized for it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I have one question from someone. Let me just see if they have their hand up in the, let me see if I could bring them on. Stan, just to ask a question. Stan, did you have a question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, so hi, this is Stan Swoboda from GlaxoSmithKline. Actually, Bob and I were just attending a blockchain in pharma conference this week, and one of the challenges, or I guess hurdles that we all I think identified as remaining was one of interoperability. And on your previous, well, actually 2 slides ago, I think slide 11, you had you indicated that your solution could support multiple blockchains. If I read that right, I saw Hyperledger, Ethereum, and multi-chain.
Yes.
How do you guys get around that challenge? Because again, I think that's a major challenge in pharma that we're still trying to crack. And I'd be curious how you guys get around that.
Sure. Yeah. We noticed that as a significant problem from our early days, because we were very sure that there will be multiple platforms out there, and everyone is going to use different platform based on their use case, based on their team skill, and several other factors, right? So, but at the end of the day, all these blockchain projects have to communicate with each other in order to do business. So what we focused on, specifically from a supply chain point of view, to create an interoperable layer on top of these platforms so that we can translate the records between Hyperledger and multi-chain and Ethereum. So that way, it doesn't matter. So in a way, from end consumer point, end client point of view, they're the core blockchain is abstracted away from them, so they don't really have to care what underlying platform they're using, as long as it provides all the features that the blockchain promises, which is immutability, decentralization, and distributed mechanism.
In that regard, then, is it essentially read only? So you're abstracting the data, because if it was read write, wouldn't you have to reconcile the consensus algorithms in order to create the proper hash to rewrite to each of those blockchains?
So there's a couple of mechanisms that we use. So in some of the areas, we do it's both read write when we are recording the data onto the blockchain for these different transactions in the supply chain. So, but there's a couple of areas when it becomes tricky. So if you are planning to migrate transactions between those different blockchains, then that's still not possible to the level of where we want it to be. So the migration is still a big challenge between these blockchains. So what we provide right now, at least in a phase where we are in terms of development, is the initial choice for customers to pick one of those platforms without changing any of the application layer. So the application layer is completely independent of the underlying blockchain platforms. So if the customer chooses to use the same apps on Ethereum, the transactions translate to a smart contract. Whereas if they choose to use Hyperledger, then it uses the consensus algorithm on Hyperledger. So that way we provide them a platform of choice early on. But the migration, as you rightly mentioned, is still tricky, and there's a lot of projects that are working in that area. But I think we'll solve that problem soon. I don't think it will be a long. It will be a problem anytime. It will be a problem like 2 years down the line.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think a lot of people are certainly on that one. That's in a sense the killer app, I think, is getting that interoperability, true interoperability amongst multiple blockchains. So yeah, interesting to see your approach. So thank you.
Yeah,
hey, Sid, we have a couple of questions that are coming in about, and I think your next slide kind of gets to this, about the people in the supply chain, and you touched on it a little bit before about the waste affecting folks that already had done their job and provided a quality product, but are you being penalized? So how do you incentivize the various players to number one, to participate, and number two, contribute to the quality?
Sure. Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and a right question at this time, because let me show some light on the project itself. So we basically run this project in partnership with University of California, Berkeley, and Government of India. So it was a good combination of a university, government, and the startups coming together to empower rural communities and improve sustainability, both from an economical perspective, but also from social and environmental value that's being generated. So we took this small fishing port called Antarvedi in the east coast of India. The current process with the fishermen and the local buyers has been passed on by generations. So they've been doing the same business for not just a few years, but like few generations. But it's very inefficient in today's world. So the fishermen catch their fish in a small fishing boats, return to the port early hours in the day. They temporarily store it in a warehouse on the port itself. And at 9 a.m., the local market opens, and the local buyers come to the market. There's only few local buyers who have a trusted relationship with the fishermen, so they buy the fish from them. There's no so one thing that I have to point out here is there's no sales records maintained anywhere till now. So there's no record of how much quantity or quality each fisherman has captured on a day-to-day basis. So which is really bad for a couple of reasons I'm going to mention. Then the local buyers buy the fish. They call the national distributors, who are bigger guys in the market, who have the packaging power and redistribution power. So they call them and tell them that, hey, I have this type of fish of this quantity. Do you want this fish? And the national guy says, yeah, we have requirement for that fish. Send it over to us. And the communication ends there. So there's no discussion on the price. The national guys don't tell them that how much they're going to make on a day-to-day basis. So the local guys packages the fish, send them over to the national guys over train, which is a couple of days journey. And during this journey, they have no visibility on, hey, whether my fish is in good condition or not, whether it's being whether it's maintaining its temperature. So they have no absolute visibility on the product itself. So when the product finally reaches the national buyers, they inspect the fish and then determine the price. So at this point, they finally say, hey, this is what I've received, and based on what I've received, this is the price that I'm going to pay you. And so there's there's a lot of conflict there. So they can just say that, hey, this is bad fish or good fish. It all depends on how good the relationship is between those two distributors, right? And the payments usually take 15 days to get back to the guys. And then finally it reaches international market from there, which is again either Singapore or Dubai. So these are like the different actual people. So at each level, each of them has different pain points. The first one is the fisherman Yadaya, for example. He earns like somewhere between $1,500 to $2,000 a year, and most of the fishermen in India are below poverty line. So these are very poor people. They live day to day based on the fish that they capture, and they have no support. So since they have no record of, hey, how much fish they have been capturing on a day-to-day basis, there is no incentives from either the government or the banks in terms of financial, either a bank loan or anything for them to buy new equipment or new raise capital to do business. So these guys are heavily dependent on day-to-day capture, and they have no bargaining power when it comes to selling the fish. The same with the local buyers as well. So these guys are they don't have access to a market other than the national buyers. They can't really go out and sell to the restaurants. They can't go and sell to the local retail markets. They can only sell it to national buyers. And the problem there is they have no visibility, so they can't really prove that, hey, their fish is reaching safely and in good quality. So that's their challenge. And like the national distributors have their own headaches because they're still very paper based. Their supply chain is very complex, and it's not too dependable because they don't have really good supply and demand information. They don't have proper supplier management and so many other things. And the big problem on the international side is, hey, how do I prove this to my consumers that, hey, this is good fish? Where's the record? Where's the provenance information? How do I ensure quality? So these are different challenges to different people. So when going back to the question of you asking us earlier, whether they're really using it as a blockchain solution or a solution which adds value. So we started this project early 2017 when very people were even interested in knowing what a blockchain was, except in the crypto industry. So we during our conversations we never spoke about blockchain, but it truly adds value as I'm going to go into these phases. So in phase one, what we said is, hey, our objective is very clear, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to track the product, track the quality of the product by monitoring the temperature, so that we can provide a couple of things. We can do better demand forecasting at each segment. We can manage the contracts between these different people in a good way, and we can also record provenance information. So those were like the simple objectives in phase one. So, and in phase 1, the biggest outcome was to gather these immutable records of the fish at each stage on the blockchain layer, which would enable us to do phase 2, which is where the government steps in, or an insurance company steps in and say that, hey, based on the data that's available on the blockchain from this fisherman, now I know how much capacity he has on a day-to-day basis. Now I can provide this microfinancing opportunities to the fishermen in the community.
Can I just ask you, how many people are actually in phase 1 were participating? Just average. You don't have to give an exact amount of fishermen, sure. Auction.
Yeah, so so our pilot location was one fishing village, which is Antarvedi, there's a fishing village and a fishing port, both next to each other. So the fishing port basically has roughly 100 to 120 fishermen. So our initial pilot was 15 fishermen, 2 local distributors, 1 national distributor, and 1 international distributor. So that's the size of the pilot.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So okay. So yeah, these are the different phases that we track the fish. If you go to the next slide, as Ravi was mentioning earlier, so these are the different. We provide a simple Android app. Android phones are very cheap in India, so they are the cheapest. Cheapest one would cost you like somewhere between 10 to 20 bucks, based on the capabilities, and the data rates are also very cheap in India. So a monthly data package would cost you as less as $2 to $3. So these are affordable. So technologies that is very different from the developed countries over here. The data rates and the phones are very expensive here. But what that enabled us is to provide this technology to the end fishermen. So we obviously didn't go with English, but we provided the same applications in the local language, where fishermen can simply enter the product that they are catching on a day-to-day basis, and this gets recorded as fisherman records on the blockchain. And what you see is in the next phase is for each port there are port inspectors, who basically collect the fish. So these are also in charge of the market, and that opens in the morning every day. So they certify each harvest, and they issue certificates. So what we did is we digitized those certificates. Earlier it was on a paper-based system. It's basically a small slip that they issue to. There's 2 copies of slips maintained. 1 copy is given to the fisherman, and 1 is given to kept as a record with themselves. So we digitize that so that we make the process simple. And then the third step is, so we also digitize the bidding process. So the local buyers in the market can look at the inventory. Ravi, if you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so they can look at the inventory of each fisherman and can bid for the fish right there on the application. So that's basically simplifies the bidding process, and it's also happening over blockchain, and we create a record of it. And then the local fishermen, once they have the fish, they capture it and ship it. So the next slide basically shows a view of, hey, where the product is in real time. What's the status of the products? This is where the temperature monitoring and all those aspects of it come into place. So, and we record alerts. We just record alerts on blockchain. We don't maintain the complete, if it's 10 degrees, 10 degrees, 10 degrees for extended like 4 hours. We don't record everything on blockchain. But if it's over, it's closer to like 30 degrees. I'm talking in centigrade, sorry. But if it's 30 degrees or 40 degrees for over an hour, which is a very high temperature, which could spoil the fish, then that's when we push a notification to blockchain and also alert all the stakeholders. So so that way the alerting is really interesting. So this is an old supply chain, right? So this is not a new supply chain. So these guys, the distributors, already have a network of people in different different parts of the country. So so whenever they receive an alert, they can call someone at the next station that the train arrives in, and make sure that they can check the cargo, make sure that it's in good condition and things like that. So now they have a mechanism where they can better leverage their network to ensure that the product is in good condition. So if you so I don't want to take too much time, so I'll wrap it up. But what we've been doing is by using blockchain, we are providing different value proposition to different stakeholders in the supply chain. On the fisherman side and the local buyer side, we are basically improving their profits by giving them better bargaining power, more visibility on the quality of the product. It's also reputation and records which they can use for applying for a financial loan or insuring their product. So insurance companies are now very interested in the data, because earlier they had no way of calculating the risk of the supply chain, so they can't really insure the products that are in the cargo. Now, since they know what's the failure rates, how many alerts are being generated, now they can provide insurance policies to protect the cargo. So that's so those are some of the benefits. On the other hand, you have the supplier increased efficiency in supply in the supplier management, and you have records of the quality of the food. And for the national buyers, when we spoke to them, it's basically enabling them to sell premium product to the international market. So they're saying, hey, here's the product, not just the product, but also the story of the product, so that your consumers can buy this fish with more confidence than the other fish in the market. So it's creating a huge differentiation for them and a market opportunity for them, so that it's a win-win situation for everyone.
So can I ask you a question? So what's interesting is that now you've connected this entire supply chain and you've done it through a ledger that is immutable. But what's interesting is the things that are happening after that. So now that you've got something that other entities can rely on, you mentioned the government, you mentioned for financing of the fishermen, you've mentioned the insurance companies for insuring the product as it moves along. Now it starts to attract a larger almost economy or other players into it, because you now have a record that's moved through.
Exactly. Yeah, by empowering them with data and the immutable data which they can trust. So that's basically that's where the true power of blockchain lies. It's not on saying that, hey, these are different people, they can communicate with each other. So that's not the end of possibilities that we can end of possibilities with the blockchain. So we can always add more people. We can add governments, we can add insurance companies, we can add like regulators into it, so they can also have the data available to them. So in a way, it expands, and the possibilities to build additional applications on top of data increases. There's a couple of examples. One is now the distributors are willing to explore tokenization aspect of it, where they want to provide more incentive to fishermen for doing sharing more data. So in a way that, if you look at the margins in the fish industry, they're very thin on the fisherman side and very big on the distributor side. But if this new technology, if data can enable them to create premium product, they don't mind sharing some of those margins all the way back to the fishermen for doing good job. So that way, it also creates a sort of an economy within itself on top of the data, which was not possible with traditional applications.
Yep. Now
Did you
it gives
actually
you an opportunity to issue something like a fish coin or something like that, which which can be used as a payment system.
right? So you could you're incentivizing quality throughout the system by sharing back that margin that is being now produced based on the fact that you've got good data.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And have you, even in this pilot, did you were talked about 20% waste and all of that in the typical market. Did you see any increase even in this small area in the product as it reached the final destination?
Yes. So I mean, on the screen, what you see is some of the numbers that we've been able to generate by tracking some of these shipments. So we were able to track nearly 1,000, and we generated nearly 4,000 alerts. I mean, most of them. Most of the stakeholders were extremely surprised to see so many alerts, temperature alerts being generated because they had no visibility at all. I mean, all this data is completely new to them, and they only had like rough estimates of how much wastage they have been seeing and how many outages they've been facing. But now, for the first time, they have records that they can see and think of how they can prevent some of these alerts. So yeah, this was very powerful for them, not just for, yeah.
By seeing that almost 4,000 alerts take place, I'm sure that when they were occurring, they may not have been able to address all of them, but this provides them enough knowledge to know that maybe we should put some processes in place, maybe different areas where we might have cold chain areas that we can put the product in and try to save it. I want to ask, or rather, Bill has put in a couple of questions. I try to adjust a couple of them, but I want to just see if Bill can, if we've answered any of his questions. Let me just open up Bill.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Yeah, Bill Macbeth here from Chainlink Research. And very interesting case study. I think you answered most of the questions, but of course, I had a couple others. I guess one of them is this 23 tons that you saved. What was the mechanism by which they were able to save? Once they saw an alert, how did they, I think you mentioned, having people at each train stop. Did they go on the train and figure out what the problem was and fix it? If you could just let me know how they're able to save that fish.
Sure. Yeah. So the way the fish is packaged is they have this thermocol boxes where the fish is layered with fish and ice. So you pour basically ice on top of them to maintain the temperature at a certain temperature range. So one of the biggest problem is the fish melts. Sorry, not the fish. Ice melts. So so they've been thinking that, hey, this ice would last throughout the journey, and that's why they also have this network of people along different stations in the train's journey to go and take a look and ensure that the fish the ice is if they need to put more ice, they could do that in some of these boxes. But they were doing it in a very inefficient way. So they would call one of their guys in the train station, like in the next few train stations, and say, hey, have you looked at the box? Have you put the ice in? But the guy would simply lie, saying that, hey, yeah, I've looked at the box and I put the ice in. But now, like since the distributors can track the temperature in real time, they can really see that, hey, has it really improved? Has it really put the ice in? So there's some sort of verification mechanism in which they can make sure that the product is in good quality.
Great. One other question then. In the produce, some people are creating shelf life models. Yeah. So in other words, it's not like a black and white that this produce is no longer any good, but it's going to last this long instead of, last 10 days instead of 15 days. Are you looking at doing anything like that?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we did come across those, especially on the vegetable side. because your tomatoes need to arrive at the retail market at just the right ripeness, so that it will improve their shelf life, and when the consumers are ready to buy, they are at their best condition, right? So it's very important to calculate the ripeness level, so to speak, so that the supply chain is planned in a proper way, and it arrives at a product at the right condition and improves the shelf life. So that is possible. So if we go back to a couple of slides, we basically track a lot of demand and supply levels in the supply chain. So so by using a blockchain, we can not only calculate the product journey, but we can also calculate the demand at the different stages of the market. So we know if in a Target store in some location is running out of tomatoes, we can also backward trace back to, hey, when should the distributor start sending new supplies in to the wholesaler and things like that.
Great, thanks.
Thanks. And I think let me just turn on. Stan may have another question for you. Hi, Stan.
Yeah, I don't really have a question, but I just wanted to commend you guys for, again, including, the aspect of the local fishermen. I think, one of the, the sort of positive philosophical aspects of blockchain is, some of the social good that can come out of that. So really commend you guys for highlighting the benefit and the win-win really across the board to all stakeholders in the process. So good job.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, it really shows the contribution to quality of each player in the supply chain, and it kind of brings that home.
We have a question from Emmett Robbins.
Let me try and find him. Here he is. Trying to unmute Emmett, but I can't. Doesn't seem to be doing it. Good. Why don't you read it?
Well, okay, it says when a solution is arrives at, is that solution documented in the blockchain or in a knowledge base tied to the blockchain and communicated to others or others? I'm not sure I'm reading that right. I'm trying to get, can't get Emmett unmuted there. I don't know why, but.
Okay, so the learnings from, if I understand the question correctly, so if there is new learnings from using the solution, how do we document it, right? Is that right?
Yeah, is that solution documented in the blockchain or in a knowledge base tied to the blockchain?
Yeah, Emmett just said that was right. You said that was the correct interpretation.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting point. So yeah, we just started. So that's something which very critical for some of the supply chains to have a proper documentation around what are the changes, the iterations that we make. So during this particular project itself, we went back, made a lot of changes. As you know, we started in early 2017 when the technology was very bad at that point. And it wasn't good enough to deploy large-scale solutions in a production environment. So we had to make a lot of changes on the technology side, but also on the solution side, because we had to always rethink on how do we make this more adaptable, how do we bring in more participation from different stakeholders, what exact pain points should we solve using the technology to bring in more adoption. So we haven't done the early documentation back in 2017, but we started documenting post phase 1 for some of these solutions. So, but in phase 2, that's what we are planning to do. We are planning to document it at each stage, each iteration, and have that somewhere linked to the, that's a good idea of linking it on the blockchain itself, have a record of, hey, what are the changes we went through during this solution.
Great. I think we're heading up to our hour here. So I just wanted to thank Sid and Ravi for being on the show, for all your knowledge here. We do have other questions that are coming in. So I'll post them up on the web area, and Sid and Ravi, you can answer those questions and be better in contact with the folks that are on the call.
Sure, absolutely. Be glad to do that. Yeah.
Just a reminder to everyone, this is going to be a weekly call, weekly podcast, if you will. Next week, we've had someone that's very familiar to our groups that we've been running, especially our cold chain group. And it ties in a lot with what we saw today, certainly cold chain aspects. And Dr. Swamy works within AI and machine learning. And so we'll learn a little bit about what that means and how to use it and how to apply it and how to understand it. So again, Sid and Ravi, thank you very much for being on our first call. And we'll be taking the recording and publishing it on the website and also putting it through podcast that I'll send everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Again.
And sign up for other week's shows.
Yeah, we will.
Sure.
Yeah.
You too, Lynette. Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Yeah, thanks. Bye.